Only a Dream by H. Rider Haggard. Footprints. Footprints. The footprints of one dead. How ghastly they look as they fall before me. Up and down the long hall they go, and I follow them. Pit-pat they fall, those unearthly steps, and beneath them starts up that awful impress. I can see it grow upon the marble, a damp and dreadful thing. Tread them down, tread them out, follow it after them with muddy shoes and cover them up. All in vain. See how they rise through the mire. Who can tread out the footprints of the dead? And so on, up and down the dim vista of the past, following the sound of the dead feet that wander so restlessly, stamping upon the impress that will not be stamped out. Rave on, wild wind, eternal voice of human misery. Fall, dead footsteps, eternal echo of human memory. Stamp, miry feet, stamp into forgetfulness that which will not be forgotten. And so on to the end. Pretty ideas these for a man about to be married, especially when they float into his brain at night like ominous clouds into a summer sky. And he is going to be married tomorrow. There's no mistake about it. The wedding, I mean. To be plain and matter-of-fact, why, there stand the presents, or some of them. And very handsome presents they are, ranged in solemn rows upon the long table. It is a remarkable thing to observe when one is about to make a really satisfactory marriage, how scores of unsuspected or forgotten friends crop up and send little tokens of their esteem. It was very different when I married my first wife, I remember. But then that marriage was not satisfactory, just a love match, no more. There they stand in solemn rows, as I've said, and inspire me with beautiful thoughts about the innate kindness of human nature, especially the human nature of our distant cousins. It's possible to grow almost poetical over a silver teapot when one is going to be married tomorrow. On how many future mornings shall I be confronted with that teapot? Probably for all my life. And on the other side of the teapot will be the cream jug, and the electro-plated urn will hiss away behind them both. Also, the chased sugar basin will be in front, full of sugar, and behind everything will be my second wife. "My dear," she will say, "will you have another cup of tea?" And probably I shall have another cup. Well, it's very curious to notice what ideas will come into a man's head sometimes. Sometimes something waves a magic wand over his being, and from the recesses of his soul, dim things arise and walk. At unexpected moments they come, and he grows aware of the issues of his mysterious life, and his heart shakes and shivers like a lightning-shattered tree. In that drear light, all earthly things seem far, and all unseen things draw near, and take shape and awe him, and he knows not what is true and what is false. Neither can he trace the edge that marks off spirit from life. Then it is that the footsteps echo, and the ghostly footprints will not be stamped out. Oh, pretty thoughts again, and how persistently they come. It is 1 o'clock, and I will go to bed. The rain is falling in sheets outside. I can hear it lashing against the window panes, and the wind wails through the tall, wet elms at the end of the garden. I could tell the voice of those elms anywhere. I know it as well as the voice of a friend. What a night it is. We sometimes get them in this part of England in October. It was just such a night when my first wife died, and that is 3 years ago. I remember how she sat up in her bed. "Ah, those horrible elms," she said. "I wish you'd have them cut down, Frank. They cry like a woman." And I said I would. And just after that she died, poor dear. And so the old elms stand, and I like their music. It's a strange thing. I was half broken-hearted, for I loved her dearly, and she loved me with all her life and strength. And now I am going to be married again. Frank, don't forget me." Those were my wife's last words, and indeed, though I am going to be married again tomorrow, I have not forgotten her. Nor shall I forget how Annie Guthrie, whom I'm going to marry now, came to see her the day before she died. I know that Annie always liked me, more or less, and I think that my dear wife guessed it. After she had kissed Annie and bid her a last goodbye, and the door had closed, she spoke quite suddenly. "There goes your future wife, Frank," she said. "You should have married her at first instead of me. She is very handsome and very good, and she has 2,000 a year. She would never have died of a nervous illness." And she laughed a little, and then added, "Oh, Frank dear, I wonder if you will think of me before you marry Annie Guthrie. Wherever I am, I shall be thinking of you." And now that time which she foresaw has come, and heaven knows that I have thought of her, poor dear. Ah, those footsteps of one dead will echo through our lives. Those woman's footsteps on the marble flooring which will not be stamped out. Most of us have seen and heard them at some time or other, and I hear and see them very plainly tonight. Poor dead wife. I wonder if there are any doors in the land where you have gone through which you can creep out to look at me tonight. I hope there are none. Death must indeed be a hell if the dead can see and feel and take measure of the forgetful faithlessness of their beloved. Well, I will go to bed and try and get a little rest. I am not so young or so strong as I was, and this wedding wears me out. I wish that the whole thing were done, or had never been begun. What was that? It was not the wind, for it never makes that sound here. And it was not the rain, since the rain has ceased its surging for a moment. Nor was it the howling of a dog, for I keep none. It was more like the crying of a woman's voice. But what woman can be abroad on such a night or at such an hour, 1:30 in the morning? There it is again. A dreadful sound. It makes the blood turn chill, and yet has something familiar about it. It is a woman's voice calling round the house. There. She's at the window now, and rattling it. And great heavens, she's calling me. Frank, 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 she calls. I strive to stir and unshutter that window, but before I can get there she is knocking and calling at another. Gone again with her dreadful wail of Frank, Frank. Now I hear her at the front door, and half mad with a horrible fear, I run down the long, dark hall and unbar the door. There is nothing there, nothing but the wild rush of the wind and the drip of the rain from the portico. But I can hear the wailing voice going round the house, past the patch of shrubbery. I close the door and listen. There. She's got through the little yard, and is at the back door now. Whoever it is, she must know the way about the house. Along the hall I go again, through a swing door, through the servants' hall, stumbling down some steps into the kitchen, where the embers of the fire are still alive in the grate, diffusing a little warmth and light into the dense gloom. Whoever it is at the door is knocking now with her clenched hand hard against the wood, and it is wonderful, though she knocks so low, how the sound echoes through the empty kitchens. There I stood and hesitated, trembling in every limb. I dared not open the door. No words of mine can convey the sense of utter desolation that overpowered me. I felt as though I were the only living man in the whole world. "Frank! Frank!" cried the voice with the dreadful, familiar ring to it. "Open the door. Oh, I'm so cold. I have so little time." My heart stood still, and yet my hands were constrained to obey. Slowly, I lifted the latch and unbarred the door, and as I did so, a great rush of air snatched it from my hands and swept it wide. The black clouds had broken a little overhead, and there was a patch of blue, rain-washed sky, and with just a star or two glimmering in it fitfully. For a moment I could only see this bit of sky, but by degrees I made out the accustomed outline of the great trees swinging furiously against it, and the rigid line of the garden wall beneath them. Then a whirling leaf hit me smartly on the face, and instinctively I dropped my eyes onto something that as yet I could not distinguish. Something small and black and wet. "What are you?" I gasped. Somehow I seemed to feel that it was not a person. I could not say, "Who are you?" "Don't you know me?" wailed the voice with the far-off familiar ring about it. "And mayn't I come in and show myself? I haven't time. You were so long opening the door, Frank, and I am so cold. Oh, so bitterly cold. Look there. The moon is coming out and you'll be able to see me. I suppose that you long to see me, as I have longed to see you." As the figure spoke, or rather wailed, a moonbeam struggled through the watery air and fell upon it. It was short and shrunken, the figure of a tiny woman. Dressed in black, it wore a black covering over the whole head, shrouding it after the fashion of a bridal veil, and from every part of this veil and dress the water fell in heavy drops. The figure bore a small basket on her left arm, and her hand, such a poor, thin little hand, gleamed white in the moonlight. I noticed that on the third finger was a red line, showing that a wedding ring had once been there. The other hand was stretched towards me as though in entreaty. All this I saw in an instant, as it were, and as I saw it, horror seemed to grip me by the throat as though it were a living thing, for as the voice had been familiar, so was the form familiar, though the churchyard had received it long years ago. I could not speak. I could not even move. "Oh, don't you know me yet?" wailed the voice. "And I have come from so far to see you, and I cannot stop. Look, look." And she began to pluck feverishly with her poor, thin hand at the black veil that enshrouded her. At last it came off, and as in a dream, I saw what in a dim, frozen way I had expected to see. The white face and pale yellow hair of my dead wife. Unable to speak or to stir, I gazed and gazed. There was no mistake about it. It was she. Aye, even as I had last seen her, white with the whiteness of death, with purple circles round her eyes, and the grave cloth yet beneath her chin. Only her eyes were wide open and fixed upon my face, and a lock of the soft yellow hair had broken loose, and the wind tossed it. "You know me now, Frank, don't you, Frank? It's been so hard to come to see you, so cold. But you're going to be married tomorrow, Frank, and I promised, a long time ago, I promised to think of you when you were going to be married, wherever I was. And I have kept my promise, and I have come from whence I am, and brought a present with me. Oh, it was bitter to die so young. I was so young to die and leave you, but I had to go. Take it, be quick. I cannot stay any longer. I could not give you my life, Frank, so I have brought you my death. Take it." The figure thrust the basket into my hand, and as it did so, the rain came up again, and began to obscure the moonlight. "I must go, went on the dreadful, familiar voice in a cry of despair. "Oh, why were you so long opening the door? I wanted to talk to you before you married Annie, and now I shall never see you again. Never, never. I have lost you forever, ever, ever." As the last wailing notes died away, the wind came down with a rush and a whirl and the sweep as of 1,000 wings, and threw me back into the house, bringing the door to with a crash after me. I staggered into the kitchen, the basket in my hand, and set it on the table. Just then some embers of the fire fell, and a faint little flame rose and glimmered on the bright dishes on the dresser, even revealing a tin candlestick with a box of matches by it. I was well nigh mad with the darkness and fear, and seizing the matches I struck one and held it to the candle. Presently it caught, and I glanced round the room. It was just as usual, just as the servants had left it, and above the mantelpiece the 8-day clock ticked away solemnly. While I looked at it, it struck 2, and in a dim fashion I was thankful for its friendly sound. And then I looked at the basket. It was of very fine, white plaited work, with black bands running up it, and a checkered black and white handle. I knew it well, and I have never seen another like it. I bought it years ago at Madeira, and gave it to my poor wife. Ultimately, it was washed overboard in a gale in the Irish Channel. I remember that it was full of newspapers and library books, and I had to pay for them. Many and many is the time that I've seen that identical basket standing there on that very kitchen table, for my dear wife always used it to put flowers in, and the shortcut from that part of the garden where her roses grew was through the kitchen. She used to gather the flowers, and then come in and place her basket on the table, just where it stood now. All this passed through my mind in a few seconds, as I stood there with the candle in my hand, feeling indeed half dead, and yet with my mind painfully alive. I began to wonder if I'd gone asleep, and was the victim of a nightmare. No such thing. I wish it had only been a nightmare. What was in the basket? I feared to look, and yet some power within me forced me to it. I drew near the table and stood for a moment, listening to the sound of my own heart. Then I stretched out my hand and slowly raised the lid of the basket. "I could not give you my life, so I have brought you my death." Those were her words. What could she mean? What could it all mean? I must know, or I should go mad. There it lay, whatever it was, wrapped up in linen. Ah, heaven help me! It was a small, bleached, human skull. Ah, a dream. After all, only a dream by the fire. But what a dream. And I am to be married tomorrow. Can I be married tomorrow? Before the next reading, I issue a warning to those of a nervous disposition. If you tremble at the sound of a quiet footfall on the stair, if your skin shivers at an unexpected sigh of wind, if your eye lingers on the shadow in the corner, and if your heart skips at the very thought of the netherworld, then you should turn back now, my friend. For you are about to accompany me into Miss Worm's personal collection. Once more, I offer you the opportunity to leave. You may fast forward to the final tale, and I shall judge you not. But if you are determined to stay, I can take no responsibility for anything that may or may not happen. Ah, you have decided to stay. Welcome, intrepid explorer. Those of you who have visited my channel before will know that I am not just a narrator, but a writer too. As an author of supernatural tales, I conduct much research on the hidden things of this earth and the mysteries of the great beyond. I have combed bookshops in forgotten back streets, scoured the penny lots of auction houses, and forged indelible bonds with those on the concealed margins of our society. What follows is from one of my more arcane texts. I make no judgment as to its veracity or its effectiveness, and of course, offer it merely as an entertaining curiosity. But remember, tonight is not just a dark moon, but Hallowe'en, the night when the veil between this world and the next is at its thinnest. I beg you, do not judge the words themselves in terms of light or dark, for it is the caster's heart that will be weighed on the final scales. You have been warned. To confound the eye of the beholder, take one freely given rook, raven, or crow feather. At the dark of the moon, stand within a circle wearing black garb. Have no jewellery, trinket, or ornament about you, and by the light of a single black candle, at the very edge of its beams, recite the following words. As I step out of space into silence, shadows of black enshroud me, envelop, encircle, enclose. As I walk within, not without, shadows of black befriend me, bewilder, bedazzle, becloud. As I venture to worlds that are empty, shadows of black conceal me, confound, contradict, and confuse. As I weave my path twixt the dusk and the dark, shadows of black misstate me, misdirect, mislead, misconstrue. Then take the raven's feather and pass it thrice in front of your eyes. On the first pass it shall be vertical, and 6 inches before your open eyes. On the second it shall be horizontal, and touch your closed eyelids, with naught but a whispered hint through the gossamer veil of time and space. On the final pass it shall return to the vertical, and with opened eyes you shall use its draught to extinguish the candle. Thus you may now walk with safety and security, as if a shade. The broiling and ignorant masses will pay you no heed, as long as you touch them not, nor utter a sound in their presence. To return yourself to your full charisma, you need only to speak. Use this wisely, and be not tempted by unwholesome gain, lest you remain in the shadows. My Hobby, Rather, by N.P. Willis. Such a night! It was like a festival of Diana. A burst of a summer shower at sunset, with a clap or two of thunder, had purified the air to an intoxicating rareness, and the free breathing of the flowers, and the delicious perfume from the earth and grass, and the fresh foliage of the new spring, showed the delight and sympathy of inanimate nature in the night's beauty. There was no atmosphere, that is, nothing between the eye and the pearly moon, and she rode through the heavens without a veil, like the queen that she is, giving a glimpse of her nearer beauty for a festal favour to the worshipping stars. I was a student at the famed University of Connecticut, and the bewilderments of philosophy and poetry were strong upon me, in a place where exquisite natural beauty and the absence of all other temptation secure to the classic neophyte an almost supernatural wakefulness of fancy. I contracted a taste for the horrible in those days, which still clings to me, and I have travelled the world over with no object but general observation, and have dwindled my hour at courts and operas with little interest, while the sacking and drowning of a woman in the Bosphorus, the impalement of a robber on the Nile, and the insane hospitals from Liverpool to Cathay are described in my capricious journal with the vividness of the most stirring adventure. There is a kind of crystallization in the circumstances of one's life. A peculiar turn of mind draws to itself events fitted to its particular nucleus, and it is frequently a subject of wonder why one man meets with more remarkable things than another, when it is owing merely to a difference of natural character. I have been thus a singular adventurer in the strange and unnatural. As I intend making my observations the subjects of several papers, I will introduce them at present with my slighter beginnings. It was, as I was saying, a night of wonderful beauty. I was watching a corpse. In that part of the United States the dead are never left alone till the earth is thrown upon them, and as a friend of the family I had been called upon for this melancholy service on the night preceding the interment. It was a death which had left a family with broken hearts, for beneath the sheet which sank so appallingly to the outline of a human form lay a wreck of beauty and sweetness whose loss seemed to the survivors to have darkened the face of the earth. The ethereal and touching loveliness of that dying girl, whom I had only known as a hopeless victim of consumption, springs up in my memory even yet, and mingles with every conception of female beauty. 2 ladies, friends of the deceased, were to share my vigil. I knew them but slightly, and having read them to sleep an hour after midnight, I performed my half-hourly duty of entering the room where the corpse lay, to look after the lights, and then strolled into the garden to enjoy the quiet of the summer night. The flowers were glittering in their pearl drops, and the air was breathless. The sight of the long, sheeted corpse, the sudden flare of lights as the long snuffs were removed from the candles, the stillness of the close-shuttered room, and my own predisposition to invest death with a supernatural interest, had raised my heart to my throat. I walked backwards and forwards in the garden path, and the black shadows beneath the lilacs, and even the glittering of the glowworms within them, seemed weird and fearful. The clock struck, and I re-entered. My companions still slept, and I passed on to the inner chamber. I trimmed the lights and stood and looked at the white heap lying so fearfully still within the shadow of the curtains, and my blood seemed to freeze. At the moment when I was turning away, with a strong effort at a more composed feeling, a noise like the flutter of wings, followed by a rush, and a sudden silence, struck upon my startled ear. The street was as quiet as death, and the noise was far too audible to have been a deception of my fancy. It had come from the side facing an uninhabited wing of the house. My heart stood still. Another instant, and the fire screen was dashed down, and a white cat rushed past me, and with the speed of light sprang like a hyena upon the corpse. The flight of a vampire into the chamber would not have curdled my veins more. A convulsive shudder ran cold over me, but recovering my self-command, I rushed to the animal, of whose horrible appetite for the flesh of the dead I had previously read incredulously, and attempted to tear her from the body. With her claws fixed in the breast, and a yowl like the wail of an infernal spirit, she crouched fearlessly upon it, and the stains already upon the sheet convinced me that it would be impossible to remove her without shockingly disfiguring the corpse. I seized her by the throat in the hope of choking her, but with the first pressure of my fingers she flew into my face, and the infuriated animal seemed persuaded that it was a contest for very life. Half blinded by the fury of her attack, I loosed her for a moment, and she immediately leapt again upon the corpse, and had covered her feet and face with blood before I could recover my hold upon her. The body was no longer in a situation to be spared, and I seized the cat with a desperate grasp to draw her off. But to my horror, the half-covered and bloody corpse rose upright in her fangs, and while I paused in fear, it sat with drooping arms and head fallen with ghastly helplessness over the shoulder. Oh, long years have not removed that fearful spectacle from my eyes. The corpse sank back, and I succeeded in throttling the insane monster, and threw her, at last, lifeless from the window. I then composed the disturbed limbs, laid the hair away once more smoothly on the forehead, and crossing the hands over the bosom, covered the violated remains, leaving them again at their repose. My companions, strangely enough, slept on, and I paced the garden walk alone, till daybreak, to my inexpressible relief, dawned over the mountains.